Okay, I will get started. I'm going to share my screen for when I do go over some skills and whatnot, for anybody who would like to see that. Okay, and then I also have a Google document up, and that's going to be linked in the pinned message in the event channel. So if you need to like access stuff afterwards, you can do that. But I'll pretty much just be going through like everything in that document. Um, But yeah, so this is an intro to tanking. I know some of you guys have tanked before. I don't know some of your names, so uh, don't know if you guys have done much of it before. But this is just kind of introducing, I guess, the most important things to think about when you are going into endgame tanking, and that includes veteran dungeons and veteran trials. Um, and I gotta kind of start this off with like a disclaimer. Um, I want you to enjoy the game. And if any part of the game is frustrating to you and you don't like doing it, then you don't have to do it. This is all just suggestions and kind of how other people are doing things, and how you can kind of expand like what kind of content you're able to clear and whatnot. Um, so yeah, getting into it. Some of the first stuff I'll go through is some add-ons that are pretty helpful for tanks. I know a lot everybody plays with the add-ons, but um, these can kind of, I guess, expand your experience with tanking. First off is action duration reminder. There is an in-game, I guess, option that does what this add-on does, but what it does is it gives you a little counter on all of your skills so that you know how long they're going to last. And that can be pretty important for keeping your buffs up, making sure that you recast things when you need to. Uh, and if you do want to do that in game naturally, I think under settings and either under gameplay or might be under combat. Yeah, under combat, they've got ability bar timers. I don't really know how well those work because I've not used them. Um, but I just use the base countdown timers from action duration reminder. Okay, after that, you don't have to use combat metronome so much as I guess healers or DPS would use it, but what that does is that adds that bar in the middle of my screen there, so every time that I hit a skill, you see the bar show up. Starts out yellow, gets to red. Normally DPS and healers would use that to weave, but what it helps you with as a tank is knowing when your global cooldown ends. So this game has a global cooldown of 1 second, so as long as you're casting a skill that isn't a channeled skill, you can cast basically one skill every second. So if you're spamming a skill over and over again, it's not going to be going off unless, you know, a full second has passed since your last skill. So that can just be a very good reminder to, I guess, how quickly you're casting, because the most effective person in the game is going to be casting a skill on every cooldown that they can. So if you have, you know, all of your skills already ticking down as a tank, you don't really need to use that global cooldown, but you know, let's say you do have something like you're keeping up stagger or something like that, you may want to use that skill when everything else is ticking already. Um, but basically, it just makes sure you're not casting too fast, because sometimes people will wonder like why their skills aren't going off. Well, sometimes it's because you're casting too fast for them to actually go off. Um, you can kind of track your cast per minute if you see the logs after a trial. You'll go to the cast menu and it'll tell you your cast per minute. As a tank, you're going to be pretty much at the bottom always, and that is because the most casts that you can do is about 120, and that would be like a light attack and a skill every single global cooldown. That's what like the DPS are going to be doing and the healers are going to be doing is very quickly casting. You're mostly going to be blocking. That's another really cool thing about tanking is that you can block cast. So if you are blocking attacks, you can also cast while you are blocking without dropping that block. Um, the exception is if you have a channeled skill. So for example, if you are a Dragon Knight, you've got, let's see, Stone Giant. Stone Giant is going to be a channeled skill on its first cast of it. When you first bring up the 3 orbs. And so if you are casting Stone Giant when something is trying to heavy attack you, you are going to get heavy attacked and killed. But any other non-channeled skill, you would be holding that block. But it does drop for that brief second. Um, Okay, some other add-ons. I've got Raid Notifier tossed in there. That and Code's Combat Alerts. Those two will give you notifications in trials and dungeons on things to block, things to dodge, other mechanics here and there. Those are super helpful if you go into endgame content, and those are also required for most guilds, Legion included. That is probably the biggest thing for tanks. Just knowing when to dodge roll things will give you a handy little on-screen counter to tell you when to dodge something. Hodor Reflexes is a pretty cool add-on. You'll see it on my screen kind of up at the top to the right of my group window. It has my name, Lafargo, Ben, Shred. That just shows your ultimate, so you can share it with your group. And then when you use an ultimate, such as me using Warhorn right now, you will see the first counter is the Warhorn counter. The second counter is your major force uptime. And major force is what you're looking for with the Warhorn. So once that major force runs out, like for now, you would have the next person Warhorn. Or use the Saxilal barrier, something like that, whatever. um, you've got Untaunted. Untaunted is a very nice add-on to have. I don't know if there are, I think the dummy is around the corner here. What Untaunted does is it tells you when you have something taunted. So it just added a bar at the top of my screen. If you have multiple things taunted, it'll add multiple bars and it'll count down. And once that bar is empty, it is no longer taunted. Not only that, but if you look away and then look at the target, it'll kind of light up the bar yellow so that you know which one you're looking at. So if you're taunting multiple things, like the axes and VAA, for example, you'll know which one you're about to taunt. There are a couple add-ons you can use to track your buffs as well. Srendar is a very clunky add-on, but some people do use it. That one is also very customizable. Unfortunately, I went through, set up my Srendar exactly the way I wanted it, and then when my add-ons updated, for some reason, I lost all of my add-on information, and so I just kind of gave up. um, But that one, you can customize it to have little bars, kind of like Untaunted, where it shows you how much time is remaining on pretty much any of the buffs that you want in the game. That includes like Line Breaker from Alkosh, or your PA uptimes, or your Major Resolve as a tank, etc. Other than that, there's also an add-on called Buff the Group. That one is a bit easier to deal with when you are in a trial group. For example, it'll add a little group frame on your screen, and that is going to show you specific buffs that you set it to show. So if I go into my settings, add-ons, Buff the Group, I can have it show, for example, Powerful Assault is already on. So if I were to enter trial, it would show a group frame with Powerful Assault, and that would just show you which people in the group have Powerful Assault. So if you're using an add-on like that, you can very easily track that. Other things you might want to track, if you're running SPC, you might want to track Major Courage. This is both a healer and a tank add-on. So those are the add-ons that I put specifically for tank. There are some others here and there. In times where we have a block bug, there is Am I Blocking? And it will tell you if you are blocking. Another thing I like to use just as a raid leader in general is Lilith's Group Manager. I don't have anything set up right now because nobody in our group has died, but when somebody dies, you can hover over their name. It'll tell you all the damage that they last took and whether they blocked it or not. So that's a good one to figure out if you blocked something or not. But that, and then most trials have their own individual add-ons that will give special callouts too. So that is that. Now, if we start with the basics of your tank build and your setup, we're going to be looking at like your attributes as a big thing. The big thing to know about tanking is that a lot of it is going to be based on your comfort level and your experience level. There's like a million different ways that you can adjust your resources here and there. I need to like re-up my food, so there we go with that. When you are picking how much health you have, how much mag and stam you have, you kind of want to go off of your comfort level as well as what you are tanking. So when you first start out, you're probably going to want around 36 to 40k health, maybe more depending on what content it is that you're doing. So right now I'm running at 43.3 with a buff from a Warden healer, the major toughness, that would go up a little bit as well. So that might be a little bit a little much on health for me. If I find that I'm running low on my stamina, my mag, I could very easily like rearrange some of that to those. Um, for Magicka and Stamina, I like to run more Magicka than Stam, because for most classes you're going to be doing a lot more Magicka casting in terms of your health and your damage shields and stuff. Um, but in terms of Stamina, you do want quite a bit. That way you can block attacks. You will be kind of lowering your block cost the more CP you have and whatnot with your gear enchants and stuff. We'll talk about that later. But for the most part, your stamina is going to be based on like how many things you're blocking, what type of damage you're taking, etc. Um, and you'll find that you're like rearranging how much stamina mag you have throughout different content. So usually, this is where I put my attribute points right now. I have a ton of magicka, some in health. I could very easily rearrange that a bit. Um, All right. Oh, and so physical and magical resistance. So this is, I guess, the main part of being a tank. I don't have any buffs up right now. Unbuffed, you see that my spell and my physical resistances are 22,400 on my sword and shield bar, and they're a little bit lower on my staff bar. That's just because sword and shield are two separate pieces. I'm running an ice staff now, which will provide more resistances than other staves. Now, you actually want to look at those numbers when you are buffed, and you want to do that with Major Resolve on. Um, and so there's a form of Major Resolve for every single class in the game, but there are also some classless. So, for example, Balance is the skill I just used. Balance is in the, I think, Mage's Guild line. Yeah, so Mage's Guild Balance. This one will last the longest in the game, but as a DK, it just happens to be better than the other option that I have, which would be, uh, let's see, oh, Spiked Armor. So this would be my other option. Um, the downside of balance is that you spend your health for it, which generally is okay. In content, you're pretty much immediately going to be healed back that by your healer. But the first 4 seconds after you use it, you reduce your healing done and your damage shield strength to yourself. So I just make sure not to use that skill if I am, for example, taking a curse from Basse or taking some other like really heal intensive damage. But other than in like an instance like that, it is a great one to use. It lasts about 8 seconds longer than my other one. Um, the guide has kind of a little icon for all of your class major resolve sources. You just want to make sure that you always have one. Another non-class one is in your heavy armor build. It is the unstoppable skill. And then any more for those, they also give you Major Resolve. They also make you immune to knockback and disabling effects, but it also reduces your movement speed. So most people don't really use this one. Doesn't last super long, but it can be really handy for things like the axes in VAA or other very specific situations. The only skill, or the only class that does not have a specific skill for Major Resolve would be Nightblade, but that one has a passive skill. That passive skill makes it so that anytime you use a shadow ability, you are given Major Resolve for a duration based on how many pieces of heavy armor you're wearing. So as a tank, you would get the maximum duration, basically. And that is going to basically be held up by you casting skills like your heal or your refreshing path. So your heal as a Nightblade tank would be like Dark Cloak. Um, so as long as you are casting those pretty regularly, you have your Major Resolve. I would say that if you are not sure if you have it up or not, you can very easily put up a buff tracker like Surrender for your Major Resolve. But that Major Resolve is very important. When you activate it, your resistances are going to go up. So on my staff bar, I'm at 26,628, and then on my sword and shield, I'm at 28,000. So those are a little bit on like the, I guess, quote unquote, lower end of resistances that you want to have. I wouldn't really go much lower than that. So about, 28K. Your resistance cap, however, is 33K. So if you are looking at your resistance numbers here and you have more than 33K while you have your buff on, you definitely want to go in there and kind of allocate some of your resistances out. But essentially, 33K is the cap. Anything above that, and you're not really doing anything, not doing yourself any favors with that, you can very easily just take where you have some of those resistances, change up some enchants and whatnot. Um, so, some of the ways that you're increasing your resistances, for example, that resistance comes from the base armor bonus that you have on your heavy armor. So you're going to get a lot from heavy. If you have reinforced gear, that's going to add to your armor. Um, if you have CP, then or if you have a lot of CP, I should say, if you're running your maximum CP passives, that will give you some resistances. Um, this is why some tanks that have kind of lower CP might not be able to take as much hits. They just need to watch their resistances a little bit. Um, defending trait on your weapons, for example, if you have defending, that will add some uh, resistances. And if you're a Nord, that gives you about 2600 resistance. So things like that, uh, you can very easily adjust them. That way, if you are running way too much resistance, you can put that into something like your sustain. And that'll just help you out a little bit more back then. So like on my character, I'm running just heavy armor. I don't use reinforced traits. I don't use defending traits on my weapons, and I'm a Khajiit, so I'm running pretty much like the base resistances that you can at your maximum passive CP, uh, and that gets me a fair amount. Okay. Um, in terms of food, most tanks will swear by Bewitched Sugar Skulls. That's going to give you your base 3 max stats plus health recovery. That is probably the highest food that you can give your max resources to, but also you've got other tri-stat foods such as your Crown Fortifying Meal. That's going to be a decent health food as well. There are some base game foods, long thin pastry with melon sauce, like these. These give you just your main base stats. The other options that you have are generally for more sustain. Things like Orzorga's Smoked Bear Haunch or Jewels of Misrule. Those will give you max health, but instead of giving max Stamina Mag, they just give regen for Stamina Mag. That would be for content like if you're not blocking a whole lot, but you do need to like cast a lot. Those are pretty much going to be when you are comfortable with the content you're doing and you just think you want more regen. In terms of potions, you are pretty much using tri-stat potions. You can use either the Crown Store ones, the Crown Restoration, or you can craft some. They're pretty much the same. Other options, depending on what content you're running, you can use an Essence of Heroism if you need more ultimates, which that's an Essence of Magicka that also gives heroism. There are essences of immovability if you want immunity to knockback or disabling effects. Um, that would be for specific content that has a lot of knockback or disabling effects. And then you've also got health regenerating potions. Um, there's a couple of those that they'll just do restoration of health and regeneration of health. And there's also a version of that potion that gives you major expeditions if you need the speed for something. In terms of Mundus, I personally have used the Atronach for years. I checked into the Tank Club. They also recommend the Atronach just as a pretty solid choice. That's just going to give you Magicka regen. Another option would be the Steed if you need the speed. But in terms of other stones, there's not really a whole lot that you need to use. There's one that increases your resistances, but you can just do that with other methods. There's ones for stam regen, etc. if you really need it in specific instances, but Atronach is going to be a pretty good solid choice. Now, champion points. There are, I guess, guides online for, I guess, the progression of where to put your CP as you are gaining CP. So if you're kind of a lower CP level, you might want to go to the Tank Club and check out their champion point page. But in terms of your options for CP, let's just talk about some very important ones for tanks. Well, Boundless Vitality is pretty important for everybody to have that on. Bracing Anchor is going to be a big one. Bracing Anchor increases your block mitigation by 20%. It reduces your movement speed though, so you're going to be a little bit slow. Usually when I run it, I also run Celerity. That's just going to kind of counteract about 10% of that movement speed. So I'm only a little bit slow and not like super slow. Um, that being said, if you are running content where you have to be fast, there is an alternative to Bracing Anchor. It is called Ward Master. This will work specifically if you have a damage shield and are blocking with that damage shield active. So if you are like a DK or another class that uses a damage shield very often, you can use Ward Master and not have to take that speed boost hit. But in instances like in Asylum Sanctorium where you have to run a lot, or in Cloud Rest where you have to run a lot, uh, you can consider using Ward Master. If you're still set on using Bracing Anchor, you just need to make sure that you have enough speed boosts in other ways to get there. That's going to be things like Race Against Time, which I believe I have on this character. Yeah, Race Against Time, Speed Skill. If you're a Warden, you've got Wings. If you're a Nightblade, you're very fast anyway, and whatnot. Fortified is a decent red CP, but that one is going to be more, I guess, if you're taking a lot of unblocked damage. I think it's just granting you armor, so that's just raising your resistances. Other than that, Bracing Anchors pretty much where you're going to go because you're going to be blocking a lot. In blue CP, I just read that Ironclad is now a better choice than Bulwark. So this just reduces your damage taken by direct damage attacks. Other things that I have in here, pretty much just these nodes here, which are mostly tank oriented. The ones over here, healer oriented. If you need to take more healing and specific content, you can use one of these. But in terms of other, I guess, useful CP in here, one that I've seen a lot is instead of using rejuvenation, which used to be really good, tanks are now using sustained by suffering. Let me see if I can find where that one is. It is in here somewhere.
Left from those purple node.
Left from the purple node.
Purple, not red, purple.
Oh, okay. I just didn't read it properly. Okay. So what this does is if you have a negative status effect on you, which is essentially all the time while you're tanking, you're going to be getting a lot more regen back. That's going to give you a lot more regen than rejuvenation. So probably a pretty solid choice if you need that. Okay. Talked about that. That is, I guess, pretty much the generic, I guess, rundown. There's also Slippery and Expert Evasion. I use Slippery a lot in instances where you know you're going to get stunned and you have to break free. And then Expert Evasion if you know you're going to be dodging a lot. Then let's see. Okay, in terms of weapon, most people I think are already pretty familiar with Sword and Shield front bar, Ice Staff back bar. Reasoning for this is a few things. On your Sword and Shield bar, you've got, all your passives are pretty important. You've also got Pierce Armor and Heroic Slash. Pierce Armor is going to be your main taunt for things. The reason that you want to taunt things is it will give minor and major breach on your enemy. That is basically giving your party free pen. Penetration is pretty important for group management, especially in trials, and so it's very important that you are taunting things. With the changes to the last patch, your chains are actually going to be applying a taunt on things, but that doesn't reduce their armor. So it'll say, the enemy will be taunted to you for 15 seconds if they're not already taunted. Super great for like trash mobs and content like BRP and then dungeons, but in terms of debuffing the enemies, you do still need to either apply a taunt or some other form of major breach. That could be either Caltrops in Alliance War. So there's a morph of Caltrops. It will be Razor Caltrops that will reduce the armor of the enemy, or if you are a Necromancer, you can use Unnerving Boneyard. But that's just something to keep in mind. Heroic Slash will give you some ultimate regen as well as apply minor maim. Minor Maim just reduces the damage done by the target, so I like to keep those two on my bar at all times. On my sword bar or sword and shield bar, on my ice staff bar, I like to use Frost Clench. Uh, this has been updated kind of recently to be a taunt, so I like to use this instead of my range taunt, which the range taunt is under Undaunted, and it would be in a rage here. Pretty much only need to use this in instances where you can't use Frost Clench or where you don't have an ice staff available. And the reasoning for that is because it does not apply any debuffs or anything, it just taunts them and gives this energy to your friends. But this Frost Clinch will apply Major Maim, which is, in addition to the Minor Maim, reduces the enemy's damage done by 10%. Um, so that one is really nice. In fact, if you are taunting a boss and you're pretty much just holding the one boss, you're probably going to be using both skills on it, just to make sure to keep up those debuffs. Another nice thing about another nice thing about the ice staff is you can use blockade of frost. That's going to give a damage shield to your friends, um, and then also does a pretty decent, I guess, way too slow enemies. Other than that, the only real alternative option that you see sometimes would be a lightning staff. Lightning staff would just apply off balance when you use your wall. Um, And that off balance is a pretty low percentage for you to apply it by yourself. So, like, the more supports that you have running lightning stuff, the more off balance you'll get. But it is usually more beneficial to yourself and to your group to run an ice staff. Um, in addition, if you are running a lightning staff, you have to be a little bit careful of your resistances on that bar because they're going to be significantly lower than if you're running an ice staff. Um, Let's see. Sometimes tanks will run dual ice stabs. That is more of like an off-tank type thing to do. And that is just because you are not getting those sword and shield passives or your two sword and shield skills here. So really depends on your group's needs, if they're trying to keep up brittle more and whatnot. Um, but generally best to do sword shield and ice staff. Um, Okay. In terms of traits and glyphs, we're gonna do kind of go through those. So when you're looking at a tank, I'm gonna use the terms big piece and little piece in terms of armor. So big piece is going to be your chest, legs, head, and your shield. Only because when you put an enchantment on those, it's going to be kind of a bigger bonus than if you do it on like a smaller piece. So those four pieces you want to either have in reinforced or infused, and that's going to be depending on like your armor needs. I think most people nowadays are going reinforced, but infused is nice if you need, like, for example, I use health enchants, and so that will increase your health from those enchants. Now, your little pieces will want to be sturdy, and so that's going to be your shoulder, arms, feet, belt. The sturdy was just going to reduce the cost of your block. Your jewelry. So I actually read that right now Tank Club is recommending Harmony. That's going to be best for your sustain and whatnot. A pretty close second would be Infused. Some people use Swift if they need speed on their jewelry, but you can also just use the standard Arcane, Healthy, or Robust. Those are just going to add to your regular resources. Now, in terms of your weapons, you'll usually want your back bar staff to be infused, and then that's going to have a Crusher enchant. Crusher is pretty important for a tank to keep up. That's going to be regardless of what type of staff you have. So right now I'm running an infused Crusher ice staff. On your front bar, you have a little bit more, I guess, options. You'll have your one-handed in either defending if you need the extra armor. I have decisive on this one for ultimate regen. Some people run charged, and if you run charged, you would run a glyph such as like a frost glyph or a fire glyph or a shock glyph, and that could be to keep up whatever you get from that specific glyph. So like If you're running charged shock, you're going to be trying to off balance your enemies and whatnot. Your shield counts as a big piece of armor, so just again, either reinforced or infused. Now, in terms of glyphs, you have quite a bit of options. I usually run health on my armor pieces. That's just kind of something I picked up from the person who taught me to tank. Um, if you are rich, you can run Tristat, Prismatic. The problem with that is that it does tend to get very expensive, and if you don't put that on all of your sets, as a tank, you're running a lot of sets, then you're going to be kind of having different resource levels each time you change your gear, and that's not really super fun to deal with. So I tend to avoid those. But you can also run things like stamina or magicka if you need more of those. Um, in terms of jewelry glyphs, you have actually a lot of options now. I either run a like reduce potion cooldown glyph on my necklace and then two bracing glyphs on my rings, or I'll run a reduce prismatic cost enchantment. That's just going to reduce the cost of your abilities. Um, those are nice, as well as some people run um, mag regen glyphs as well. So that's something that I do put in the guide just because there's a lot to kind of go through with those. Um, but basically, yeah, that's that. In terms of sets, we've got a lot to go through. Now, if you are just starting out tanking, there's a couple of crafted sets you can use. There's Torix Pact. Uh, Torix Pact is kind of a crafted option. That would be like an alternative to running either Crimson or Alkosh. What that's going to do is it's going to reduce the armor of your enemies, and that's going to be good for your group's penetration. There's a new one that came out too called Druid's Braid. If you are running crafted sets and you don't have a monster set, you can very easily run 7 pieces of this armor because it is actually a 12-piece set. And what Druid's Braid does is it just gives you additional resources for each additional piece of armor. So, you know, 5 pieces of the set versus 7 versus 12, whatever. It's just going to increase your base resources. As a tank, when you start out in this game, it is a little bit harder to tank the end game stuff, mostly because you are going to be struggling on resource sustain as well as armor. And that's just something that you kind of naturally build up over time with your CP. It's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, I've seen a friend start out in this game with a tank from the very beginning. And because I didn't make a tank until I was about 400 CP with the old CP system, I didn't kind of see like how much you can struggle with very low CP. And so it's just mainly pretty important to watch both your resistances when you're buffed as well as your resource sustain. Um, so it does have a little bit of um, an actual cap on like in terms of what you can do based on your actual resources and stuff. Whereas healing and damage dealing is not affected, I guess, so much with being lower CP. So um, that's if you're starting out. Now, if you are more advanced and you're looking to tank trials, generally we will run a tank in Yolnahkrin and another set, which could be either Pearlescent Ward, Powerful Assault, Turning Tide, things like that. Um, these are all going to be sets that you're going to see like in builds that other people are posting online. Um, Off tanks will usually run sets like Saxil Champion, or they'll run the Powerful Assault set. You have to be kind of careful with these sets because they do have different ways to proc them. So you have to make sure that you like read the information on the set. So Saxil is going to give you major force depending on how much ultimate you have when you use it. So for example, if I'm the tank running Saxil, I want to make sure that my ultimate is all the way full before I use it. And I want to make sure that I don't use it at the same time as somebody else is using a horn. Because then it's just kind of overriding that person's major force. Sets like Turning Tide, that will give you major vulnerability. That is something that like a Necromancer can provide with their Colossus ult. So if you have a lot of Necromancers in group, you don't want to run Turning Tide. So a lot of time it is just checking what buffs and debuffs your group can already provide and kind of adjusting around that. Let's see. In terms of Mythics and like arena sets. As a tank, you have two arena sets that can be a little bit useful. You have Puncturing Remedy, which is the sword and shield set from Dragonstar Arena. That can be helpful if you need a lot of healing. It heals you when you puncture. So sometimes if people are really struggling, you'll see the tank just puncturing something over and over again. They're probably wearing that set. Um, Another set is the Sword and Shield and Vadishran. That is Void Bash. That can be useful in dungeons or places with a lot of trash enemies. If you bash, it basically chains in all the enemies to you. Other than that, tanks are not super running, arena sets or anything like healers would be. Um, when you do run an arena set, you just have to make sure that your weapon and jewelry set is a set that you can proc on your front bar. So, for example, Saxlil, I could totally proc that while wearing, an arena set on my other two weapons. I just have to make sure that I swap to the bar that has Saxlil and then use my ultimate. Um, for mythics, you've got Spelder of Ruin. That sacrifices your sustain to give other people weapon and spell damage. You have to make sure you activate it before you go into combat by crouching and uncrouching. Seerbane's Ward is pretty new. That one makes you not be able to move while you're blocking, but it gives an AoE that kind of increases the block mitigation and protection of your group members. Um, Other than that, not a whole lot of options. If you do run a mythic, you just want to make sure that you run only one piece of a monster set. And so you'll just be looking at like the one piece bonus of your monster sets. Now, in terms of monster sets, you have a lot of options. I would say that if you are a tank just starting out and you need that extra sustain, a couple of monster sets that are really useful are Engine Guardian or Stonekeeper. So Engine Guardian will give you sustain on either your stam, mag, or your health, kind of randomly. It'll pick one of those resources. A little dude will come up and restore it for you every time you hit a skill. And then another option for sustain would be Stonekeeper. Stonekeeper, when you block, you stack energy charges. When you get 6 charges, you restore quite a chunk of stamina and magicka and healing. So that one is pretty good if you can do Frost Vault on Vet. Other than that, Engine Guardian's a pretty decent one to get. Now, in terms of group sustain, or I guess group buffing your group rather, there's Incratus. That increases the fire damage of the group and reduces their fire damage taken. You've got Nazare, which increases the duration of debuffs on your enemies when you use your ultimate. You've got Archdruid Deverick. That's going to basically be an alternative to either Turning Tide or if people are using their Necromancer Colossuses from Major Vuln. And then you've got Tremor Skill, which is what I'm wearing now. This will reduce the armor of your enemies. When you're joining a trial group, you will often have people in this start talking about either, Tremor Scale or Crimson Oath as a set or Alkosh. Those are all sets that reduce the enemy's armor. The enemies in this game have about 18,200 armor, and so you want to make sure that everybody's penetration can reach as high to that number as possible. And just as a tank, you kind of have the responsibility to make sure that you're keeping up Major Breach with your taunt. And then you would usually want somebody to wear at least one penetrative set. So if you have a DPS wearing Alkosh, you don't have to worry about it. But if you don't, you might want to offer Crimson Rive. So Crimson is a pretty good set to have on hand. That one you get from Dreadseller. I know I've got it in here somewhere, but yeah, that and then also Tremor Skill. So it also depends on what armor your group is wearing. If they're wearing a lot of medium armor, then it is important that you give them pen. Players that are in light armor already have kind of a lot of natural pen. Okay. Trying to think of other set information. Does anybody have any questions about any sets? Or I guess any traits or enchants or anything? Yeah, there's the Crimson Oath.
Yeah, you said that you will be running you run a lot of sets. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how many sets do you have?
So that is a great
And the
question.
reason I ask
Yeah.
is because like my tank is only level 32.
Oh, you're
right?
good.
So
Yeah.
I'm looking at the future, like how much work am I gonna have to put into this?
So when we introduce
Lots.
people into trial tanking, usually you will be running with two tanks. So in that instance, you would have a main tank and an off tank. Your main tank is usually running, Yolnacrin, and then a secondary set to go with it. Could be Pearlescent. And then the off tank would be running two separate sets. And so that would usually be like Saxhleel and PA, for example. So you usually want to start out with about 4 5-piece sets. But that being said, you're going to have a ton when you go through it. So let's see, I've got Turning Tide, Powerful Assault, Torrigs, Earthgore, Eben. Eben's really old. You don't really have to worry about that. But I run a lot of sets.
I don't have to
uh,
worry about Ebon Armory.
Correct. Yeah. So Eben adds a maximum health to the group. Since the more
Hmm.
recent CP changes, a lot of people have been able to run a lot more health than they had in the past, and so Eben's not super important anymore. Um, if that's all you have, then it's all you have. It's not gonna like hurt anybody. Um, but generally, you'll be wanting to look for like better sets. So
So I'm
yeah,
sticking with PT and Eternal Vigor.
yeah. So yeah, a lot of the more, I guess, important sets that you would run are usually going to come from trials. And so when we like get people started in trials and Legion, we kind of try to assume that people are coming maybe from a not trial background, and so we give them options of dungeon sets as well, or overland sets. Powerful Assault is an overland set. You can buy it from guild stores. It is very expensive though. It actually comes from PvP. Um, the
It's
I'm
so
sorry.
expensive. No, I'm
Yeah, it
sorry.
is.
I was reminding myself of the time I bought Battalion Defender on console a few years back because I was trying to pair it with Frozen Watcher.
Yeah.
I went through at least 1,000,000 gold.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's pretty much the same for PA. Um, but some other sets you can get from dungeons. You can get Crimson Oath from Dreadseller. That one's a very good set. Turning Tide comes from Shipwright's Regret. That one is a good set. Turning Tide, kind of a neat proc ability. So when you block and you take damage, you will get charged up, and then the next bash you do, it does a conal effect on whatever's in front of you, and that gives the major vulnerability. And so that
I've
one,
noticed it's very finicky though.
so it's the best way to track that set actually is to use an add-on called Turning Tide. And what that will do is it'll put a number on your screen. It'll say, your set is ready to use in, and then it'll say how many seconds. And at that point, as long as you block an attack, it'll be like, okay, you're ready to bash. It'll say bash, and then you can bash, and it'll use it. So it's just the cooldown that's kind of weird on that one because you can't use it, all the time. um,
Yeah,
but if
it
you,
isn't very descriptive either because all it says is when you block.
yeah, you do have to take the damage. So that's why, like, it's not a great set to run on your off tank because a lot of the times your off tank is not taking the damage from the main boss. And so what are they going to be able to activate it on? It's kind of a case by case basis. But it is a good set for like main tanks to have. Um, you just have to kind of be aware of its, I guess, procking requirements. And honestly, I've always run it with the add-on. The add-on is super great by letting you know when you can activate it. So I do highly recommend looking for Turning Tide under add-ons. Um, but other than that, I mean, there's just a lot of sets that you can amass as a tank and as a healer. Um, if you get, 4 really good sets, that will get you into, a lot of your starting trials and dungeons, though. That way you have a little bit to kind of switch between. If you were looking at sets like Powerful Assault, that specifically is not a heavy uh, not a heavyweight armor. I think it's light, so you wouldn't want to run it on your body pieces because you want to run heavy armor. So you would always want to run weapons and jewelry of Powerful Assault. So you just kind of have to like make sure that you are looking at those requirements. PA also has an add-on, I believe, but I generally actually track Powerful Assault based on Vigor. So Powerful Assault lasts for, I think, 10 seconds, and then if you go to your Assault skill, the skill that I use to proc Powerful Assault is going to always be Echoing Vigor. I just basically make sure that I cast this skill twice to cover the full group because Powerful Assault hits 6 people at a time. So cast it twice, and then when that's about to run out, cast it twice again. But let me see how long that. Yep. Okay, 15 seconds. So Echoing Vigor lasts 16 seconds and Powerful Assault lasts 15 seconds. So using Echoing Vigor and just watching it tick down on your timer is a pretty good way to make sure that you're keeping it up on your group. You just want to always make sure that the uh, weapons that you have Powerful Assault on corresponds with the same bar that you have Echoing Vigor on. Are there any other questions about sets or like traits or anything?
So Turning Tide
Yes.
and your
hmm
Turning Tide body set.
So you can use it for body or for weapons, because that is a heavy
Right.
armor set.
So if you're wanting to use Puncture and Remedy,
Yes. So if you want to
uh,
use Puncturing Remedy with Turning Tide, you can. You just have to make sure that you always do the bash on the
they're
bar that you have it
you're off
equipped
bar.
on.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. That's the great thing about a lot of tank sets is that they are based on procs. Mjolnirkrin, you would probably want to keep bodied because you usually have a taunt on both your bars. You don't want to accidentally like not taunt at the right time to activate it. But I mean, you're probably keeping it up pretty well regardless, as long as you're applying both your taunts for their debuffs. But like, Saxhleel, Powerful Assault, Turning Tide, those are all going to be activated when you do something. So as long as you do that something on the correct bar, everybody will get the buff.
Yeah, I was just curious because it's just kind of sitting there waiting to be constructed, reconstructed. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well,
Yep. Yeah, Turning Tide is a great set. Just got to make sure that you don't have like 2 or 3 neckers in the group already, because if you do, they're generally going to be enough to be able to keep Major Vuln up pretty well. Um,
so in that case, what would be the second set?
so if you are running Yulnigrin, I recommend Pearl is a great set to have on
Pearl.
hand. If you're, and this is if your off tank is already running like Saxhleel and Powerful Assault, because those are very, I guess, off tank type sets. Um, Alternatively, you can run Crimson, because it is very nice to have that extra pen. Most of the time, people are not going to turn down a pen set.
Hmm.
um, yeah. I mean, when people are looking at their pen, they're pulling up a CMX. I don't have anything going on right now, really, but they're going to be looking at their uh, penetration, and they're under effective. They want that to be as high as possible, up to like 8,200 or 18,200, because that's just the number for like trial bosses and dungeon bosses. Um, yeah. So I just want to, make sure you have a source of major breach. Now, if we go over skills, that's, I guess, going to be like the meat and potatoes for a lot of tanking is your skill set, because you have a ton of options. If you thought you had a lot of gear to worry about, now you have a lot of skills to worry about. So you're going to need a lot of skill points. We'll go over the non-class specific first. Okay, so under sword and shield, you want the two, puncture and low slash, of course. Now you have some other options to choose if you really need them. Sometimes I use defensive stance or defensive or absorb missile, which is the other morph. This one specifically in instances where you're getting shot with a very heavy missile. So for example, if you're in Cloud Rest, this is a great skill to use against Amaja. I usually have it morphed the other way to heal when she hits me. But that is basically just a little damage shield. When you use it, just puts up that damage shield, and it is specifically for your missiles. Now, a lot of tanks actually can get a pretty hilarious parse on Locustes in Sunspire with this skill. If you have defensive posture, it is reflecting those light attacks from the Ice Dragon back at him. And I've seen tanks get parses of like 30k just because they are reflecting his attacks back at him. Or that is going to be another, like if you're ranged tanking Loki, then you're going to be using a skill like that. So this particularly if you're taking a lot of ranged attacks. Not so much a skill you need all the time. Shielded Assault is fun. This is your gap closer if you don't have a class-based gap closer. That is just going to let you zoom at something. And that is useful in specific instances. For example, in either Dreadsail Reef, or if you are in Halls of Fabrication and you need to switch bosses with the other tank, then you can get to the enemy really fast and do that. Generally, I don't keep that on my bar for, dungeon tanking or anything like that, just because it's not super useful and you could have something way more useful on your bar. That's just going to be in cases where you really need to get to the enemy fast. But it is fun to use. um, for your destruction stuff, you got a lot of options too. I usually have Crushing Shock morphed on a tank because sometimes it is important for you to interrupt enemies. This is going to be your range interrupt if you have a staff on. Very important for you and healers to have that skill. Wall is very important as well. I usually use the morph that makes it bigger and lasts longer. And then Destructive Clench, like I said, this is a taunt now. That also applies the major maim. And then Elemental Drain. You can use Elemental Drain or the other morph, Elemental Susceptibility, which is, I guess, more popular now. This is going to be used in very specific instances. Normally a healer will run this skill, but you are going to be running it on things that you can't reach. For example, like the crystals downstairs in the portal of Cloudrest. So if you need to, debuff an enemy for your DPS and you can't reach it, you're going to be able to apply that Major Breach with this skill, as well as Minor Magic Steel for their sustain.
Need to craft a nice staff real quick.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Okay. Under armor, so it is actually very important to check your armor passives. If you are accidentally or intentionally wearing any light armor or medium armor, you want to make sure that you do have the passives here, or else that armor is not doing a whole lot for you. So if you are running, for example, a monster set and you don't have the weight that you wanted, make sure that you are running the passives for that. Under heavy armor, you want to make sure you have all your heavy armor passives, of course. Underworld, don't really need to worry about those. Under Guild, Fighters Guild. So, couple things here. If you are not a DK with chains, you typically will want to level Silver Bolts into Silver Leash. This includes if you are a Necromancer or a Warden. Wardens do have the portal skill that will bring enemies to you if you place the portal under them. However, sometimes it is a lot easier just to grab them with the leash. I also don't know if the portal taunts now, whereas the leash does.
Nope.
It does not.
It's
Awesome.
the leash that taunts.
Okay. Yeah, so you'll definitely want that. And then Necromancers, they do have Beckoning Armor, which is your major resolve source, and that does bring in enemies that are already hitting you, and that is handy. However, I usually like to have the Silver Leash just to make sure that I am pulling things in super fast and not kind of relying on them already hitting me. So Silver Leash is going to be great. The downside to Silver Leash, as opposed to Dragonite Chains, is it's not going to refund any stam that you use to pull in something that can't be pulled in. So if something is already stunned by your DPS, then oops. Ring of Preservation is very good if you have the room for it. It just gives your group minor protection, major endurance, so it reduces their damage taken and whatnot in very damage heavy instances. You just place that on the ground and they benefit if they're standing in it. Don't really need to worry about these. In terms of passives, I mean, these are not super important. Like, as a tank, you're not going to be relied on to do damage. So, now, the ulti-gen can be great if you have a lot of DPS in your group killing things for you. Under Mage's Guild, I pretty much only use Balance. I don't think anybody uses anything else unless you are running in Kratos. If you're running in Kratos, you have to proc that skill by using a fire skill. And if you are not a Dragon Knight, then Fire Rune is a good alternative. So that can be a decent fire skill to use to proc that set. Or if you are running, for example, Elemental Catalyst on a tank, you have to have a source of fire, ice, and electric damage in order to keep that up. And this could be your source of fire damage. Balance is great on specific classes. Not going to be great on every class. I mean, like I said, Beckoning Armor is pretty great. That has that pull. The Warden Major Resolve is pretty great because it applies it to your whole group. So you would use that instead of Balance, for example. But on a DK, I do prefer Balance over the Spiked Armor and whatnot. So it's just a very good option. You don't really need to run it on a Nightblade, for example, because you're already getting your Major Resolve from your passives. Yeah, I have my passives in this setup as well. Under Psijic Order, um, so a lot of tanks do run Undo because they can kind of reset their health pretty easily that way. Also, having it slotted, what is it? I'm trying to think of. Yeah, so if you have it slotted, you can get that concentrated barrier from the passive here, which is just anytime you block with a Psijic skill on your bar, you get a little damage shield. Race Against Time is great if you don't have a class speed boost. And then Deep Thoughts. It's funny that I have this on my bar. I was doing a pug random vet and we got the cauldron and they were really struggling on the last boss and I was really struggling in sustain because they were struggling so hard, and so I actually was using this skill. But basically all it does is has you meditate to regen all your resources. Can't do anything while you're doing it, but it can be helpful if your group is kind of learning. Um, and it's definitely, I guess, interesting. If you have any of these skills, you do want to have at least some of these passives. Just kind of go through and check which ones. Don't really need spell orb, because this is whenever you use one of the skills, you generate an orb, and then those do damage. But you're not really a damage dealer, so you don't have to worry about that. Undaunted, you want all your undaunted passives. And then in terms of the skills you have, Overflowing Altar is great. You want to have at least uh, one support using this skill in the group if you are doing trials. Dungeons is great as well. This provides a synergy for your group when they are low on health, and that will basically heal them to full. And so, great to have a person run it. Either morph is great. Inner Fire, I don't really use it as much anymore. That's just because Clinch is so good. But it can be helpful if you can't use Clinch, or if you're using a Lightning Staff, for example. Bone Shield is a decent skill. Bone Surge, you're probably not going to use it a whole lot on tank, but the main usage of it is when you morph it to Bone Surge, you give people Major Vitality. Major Vitality increases everybody's healing received by 16%. That's a pretty decent buff. So usually have healers run it in Cloud Rest, but it can be good for your group if they're struggling a bit. Orb I had at one point just for an extra, I guess, boost for people. This is something your healers run. You'd only ever run it if you're missing a healer. Under Alliance War, you usually will want Aggressive Horn on your front bar, and then the other ultimate from Alliance War, Reviving Barrier on your back bar. This is going to be up to your group and up to what class you are. If you are a Necromancer, often they will ask for your Flesh Colossus for the major vulnerability. If you are a different class, they may ask for, whatever your ultimate is specific to your class. Sometimes as a Dragon Knight, you'll slot Magma Shell instead of Barrier. That's just if you really need the clutch vulnerability. But generally speaking, most setups will run Warhorn and Barrier. Now, the rest of the skills here, like I've said, Echoing Vigor is a great skill to proc PA, but it is also a very decent heal in general for the group. It is comparable to Radiating Regen in terms of how much it heals over time. So very good heal to have if you have the space for it. Now, Caltrops, like I said, this is great if you have a lot of enemies that you won't be able to taunt before they die. So just toss that out. It will apply Major Breach to them if you are running Razor Caltrops. Under the support line, Purge, you do want to have Purge, an effective Purge in specific content. That is going to keep you alive in things like Halls of Fabrication or Asylum Sanctorium in the Fire stage. This is a very niche, I guess, situation-based skill, but it is very important for you to have it, especially if you are helping Purge a group. Guard. Guard is a great skill to have as well. There are some instances in, I guess, some of the harder content in trials specifically, where if you are an off tank, you are guarding the main tank. What that does is you put it on both of your bars, and then you activate it on somebody, and then it will guard them. So like if I have it on here, I can go over here, guard somebody, and now like it was a half. 30% of the damage that you take will now be redirected to me. So if your main tank is taking a lot of damage, usually in hard modes, that damage will now also be split with either the off tank or a healer, whoever's running it. Blinding Flare, Revealing Flare specifically, this one is actually a very good tank skill, but it is kind of hard to get because you do have to hit, level 7 Alliance War line, which can take a while. But this skill, just having it slotted, will give you major protection, which reduces your damage taken by 10%, and that is amazing. So if you are taking just barely too much damage, pop that on your bar. You don't even have to activate it. Most of the time, you will activate it because it's there. But you don't need to activate it. It just reduces your damage taken, and that's super helpful.
I think the warden has something similar to that.
Like a passive?
Yeah, Falcon's Swiftness. There's a morph that if you just have it slotted, it does the same thing.
Oh, major protection. Yeah, yep. So anytime that you have a named buff, for example, like where it says while slotted, you gain major protection, you want to make sure that there's not something else you're already getting major protection from. So that is a good point to bring up because major and minor buffs do not stack. So if you're already getting it from one source, you're not getting it from another. You can always also Google a buff, and then you can find a page that'll be like, okay, here are all the sources of that buff. That way you can kind of check to see which one you want to use. That can be helpful. Definitely put all your racials in. One that you want to always put in under your crafting lines is medicinal use. That's just going to increase the length of time that your potions are effective.
Oh, right. The warden, it depends on which one you choose.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because Deceptive Predator gives you minor evasion.
Ah, yes, evasion.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Evasion is a great, I guess, buff to have. I don't know that I can get it on a Dragonite as easily, but some other classes you can get it, like on Warden, or if you're on Nightblade, for example. Nightblade has a skill that gives you major evasion. I usually keep it up all the time. That's great for taking a lot of AoE damage. Is it the ice one? I think the ice one gives major protection.
Ice
But
Fortress.
I could be wrong. Yeah. I used to have a Warden tank, but I turned her into a mag DPS. In terms of class skills, I mean, it's going to be a lot of situational stuff. Every class has something that they bring to the table for the group. For example, if you are a Templar, you're usually going to be wanting to run something from like Power of the Light or like Vamp Bane or something because you want to activate your passive that gives you group crit. If you are a Dragonite, then one option is you can run Igneous Weapons. This is a popular one recently. If you run this one, it gives major brutality and sorcery. And then if you are providing that to the group, they just have to worry about their sources of endurance and intellect, and then they can use tripots instead of using their regular weapon power pots or spell power pots. So people really like this one recently. As a DK, you can also run Stone Giant to keep stagger up on your enemy. Or you can run Engulfing. This is one of those things where you have to look at the composition of your group and say, is there already somebody playing the class that I'm playing? So if you are a Dragonite, make sure that one of the Dragonites in your group is running Engulfing Flames. If they are not, then you want to run Engulfing Flames because this specific skill increases the amount of flame damage that enemies take from everybody who's using flame damage. So that is a pretty significant buff. Now, as a DK, you have your chains here. What else? Talons for rooting things in place. Most classes have a root. Coagulating blood on a DK is going to be your main heal. And then as a DK, you also want to run Igneous Shield. That in combination with your heal is going to activate your, pretty sure it's Major Vitality, or Major Mending. Major Mending, which increases your healing done. So you activate that, and then you activate your heal, and your heal will be much bigger. Now, in terms of like which morph you use for your heal, there's Green Dragon's Blood. That's going to be a smaller heal, but with more vitality. And then Coagulating Blood is a bigger heal up front. So that one I do like better now. Sorry, was somebody going to ask somebody or something?
No, I just need to leave to go find a reset stone.
Sure. Other skills, Deep Breath is good for interrupting enemies. A lot of it is just, seeing what your class has to offer. If you are a warden, for example, you might be the only source of major toughness for the group, in which case you might want to run a heal. Or you will be running Fetcher Flies for that minor vulnerability, as long as there's not another warden in the group running that. In terms of Necromancer, you have a lot to offer your group. You have a skill that gives them Empower when you use it and roots enemies in the ground. You have that totem that gives protection. That one's really nice. You've got your Boneyard. Unnerving Boneyard is great for assigning Major Breach. Yeah. Are there any, I guess, specific questions about specific classes that I can answer? Because right now I'm on a DK, and I know that there are people who do not DK tank.
I can't think of anything right now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of online sources will give you, a basic build for your tank. You just have to kind of keep in mind the fact that a lot of those skills are going to be changing depending on what your group needs at the time, or what content you're doing. And a really, really good resource for pretty much if you have any questions about your build or about even specific trials, things like that, would be thetankclub.com. And that is just, I guess, like an ESO tank community, just because tanking does happen to be very experience based, and also very versatile and different depending on what you're doing. It is very nice to have a resource like that to look at when you have questions. But for the most part, like I've already said, you've got your attributes and your resistances here to look at. And just make sure that you're hitting pretty good numbers on both. Any additional, resistance that you have over like 33k for sure, but even you could go lower, so like 31 to 32k. Anything other than, above that, you can kind of turn into something else. So like maybe take a reinforced trait off, exchange it for an infused, take out some CP that's under, armor, and then put it into some sustain, something like that. Just kind of being familiar with your class passives can help as well. It's not so much anymore, but you used to be able to cast any skill from the Earth and Heart line, and that would give you back some stam. And so you could very easily cast Cinderstorm since it's very cheap, and it would give you back a lot of stam.
I remember when perma blocking was a thing.
Yeah.
They took my baby away.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. You do have to watch your resources when you're blocking. Really nice update very recently. You can block while weapon swapping now. You were not able to do that before. So if you weapon swapped at the wrong time and something heavy attacked you, you would die. Now you
I
can
do know
swap your
that
bars.
the warden has a skill that gives them stamina back even when they're blocking. If I remember, yeah.
The bull rush or something.
The bull
So the bull
netch.
netch.
Bull
Yep.
netch.
Yeah, good skill to have on a tank for a warden. Even the healer uses the Betty netch. But yeah, you just want to make sure that you always have stam. If you run out of stam, you're not going to be able to block and you'll just kind of die. In addition, if you have the Tri-Focus passive on your staff line, that is going to make it so that if you are on your ice staff, you are using Magicka to block with. So if you are in content blocking a lot and you're on your ice staff, you may not realize it, but if you run out of Magicka, you're going to die. Because you're using Magicka to block with instead of stam on your ice staff. Now, part of being a tank is just knowing which attacks you can block and which ones you don't have to. Once you know which attacks you don't have to block, you can very easily use that time to heavy attack and get your resources back. And that becomes very important in vet dungeons and vet trials because you will be taking a lot more, more of a hit to your sustain in those content. So always good to know when you can heavy attack to get that stand back. All right. Does anybody have any other questions?
No, I'm just I'm just trying to think of. I'm sorry. I'm probably gonna need a transcript of all the major tank skills I'll need.
It's all good. Most of the skills you can find under the Tank Club has a page for all skills and when you would need to use them. I think I put in the guide that I linked just kind of just a little typical skill setup. So as you can see on my bar, on all of my tanks, usually I run my source of major resolve in the same spot. On my staff bar, I pretty much always run wall, though I do give up this skill if I need to run something else. Alter, I use Cinderstorm as a little slow heal over time. And then I usually put my taunt on the same bar on both bars, so number 3. Then on my sword and shield bar, I run my taunt in the middle, low slash, and then I run my shield and my heal. And then if I need chains, I'll usually run them there too. One handy trick I use when I'm chaining in enemies is I jump. It makes it easier to reach things that are behind other things. I picked that one up from a tank friend. But basically your job as a tank would be to run in, grab everything, and round it up so that everything is in one spot for your group to be attacking. And now that chains actually applies major breach, you can just run in, chain everything to you, and then let your group mow it down.
There it is. After an arc.
What does Cinderstorm do again?
It is a little heal over time. Summon a Scorching Cloud of Ash for 18 seconds, reducing enemy movement speed and healing you and your allies every 1 second. So that one I just keep up underneath me. Kind of an
Yeah,
alternative would be maybe Fighter's Guild. Ring of Preservation would be good.
Oh.
Yeah, so this one heals less, costs more, but it also applies minor protection. So either or. When I'm taking a lot of damage on this tank, my main course of action would be to shield and then Green Dragon Blood heal if I need to. A lot of damage, you can just kind of shield over and over again. Since you have that skill under Earth and Hearts, you are also getting some stand back every time you use it. And so you kind of can just Igneous spam to an extent and have stam. Yeah. Trying to pick my brain for anything else helpful, but I did write down everything I could think of in my little guide. Another class that I really like to tank on is Nightblade.
Never done that.
It's really fast and zoomy.
So, like, one of the things that I struggle with is like the PvP stuff. So just do y'all ever run events in like Cyrodiil to help people get? Because
Oh
like
my god! Thank you.
I'm just no. I mean, because I'm struggling to get to the Warhorn.
Right.
Let alone, yeah, like you're talking about like skills that are like, oh
If
yeah,
you-
you only got to
to
get to like
the
level
Warhorn, if you
7
want
or
a
whatever.
suggestion, I would just say suffer through the battlegrounds because they also count towards the Alliance war trees.
So I
Do
can
they?
definitely mention it.
Yes, they do.
Yeah,
I
they
did
do.
not know that.
Yeah, so do
Yeah.
that. You get that XP buff if you're first or second place. Alternatively, I mean, you can do the really slow, like repairing walls. But if you want, I can go ahead
I've been doing
and
the
mention.
dailies. It's horrible.
Yeah, it can be very slow on your own, especially as a tank, because you're not really killing anybody. Best thing to do if you go into Cyrodiil is to find a group that is just taking pugs. That, or I can mention we're doing a meeting next Monday for what events are going on next month, and I can mention it to Pisces, see if anybody wants to do an Alliance War Day.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, if we had like a big Zerg and we could just run
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
and like take pieces,
Oh
like,
yeah. That's
you
like the
know,
best way. Another way that I've found helps is when you have heals on your bar, if you're in a big group of other players, put on just a pretty big heal, even, I don't know, put a heal staff on and some healing staff skills. Because if you heal people who are killing other people, you get CP, or you get AP for their kill. So,
Basically, you're basically getting an assist for the kill.
yeah.
you're leeching XP.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
The easiest way is
Spam
really
radiation.
at level 10, get a tune in to BGs. By level 28, you'll have all the way up to 7. You stay till about 32, you'll end up at 10, and you can
Yeah.
just buy it with crowns later if you wanted to go that route.
Yeah, it can definitely be a struggle and annoying. Like you're
And plus,
not the only person.
and plus they have like crazy 8 weekend. Right? I mean, it's only 12 hours remaining right now, so it won't really help you unless you're gonna like just do BGs. But yeah,
Right.
the BG suggestion was really smart
Yep.
because you can
I
level that
I
up
didn't know that.
really fast.
Yeah, I didn't know battlegrounds counted.
Yeah.
I
They
thought it
do.
was just stuff in
PvP.
Cyrodiil.
Hmm.
Yep. As somebody who doesn't spend a whole lot of time in PvP, I totally agree. It is kind of a pain
Yeah,
in the
it's
butt.
been like none. It's like as little as possible.
Yep. Is there any
Yeah.
other
My goal is
questions?
to get in there and get out. Really.
Yeah, for real. I can definitely bring it up to everybody when we're doing planning events and stuff, and if they want to add it, I think Mid-Year Mayhem's probably coming up pretty soon too. And I know that we do events based around Mid-Year Mayhem for that extra AP.
I do know that Crazy King was on for a weekend.
I think it's still just barely ending.
Yeah,
Yeah,
12
there's
hours.
one going on right now.
Hmm. Yep. So if anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Other than that, yeah, I have everything written in that document. And then if you have usually any questions about your build or need like suggestions or anything, the Tank Club is a very good site to go to. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I do have to get to a raid, but I did take attendance. I'll do a door prize after my raid, and then also I want to get together little like just little gift baskets for attending, basically.
But
I
who was the
appreciate
other
it.
one struggling with PvP? Because let me know